Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Canadian Story. I'm very happy to have Scott Pettigrew on here. I met Scott on the Aaron O'Toole leadership campaign when I called him and asked him to help us run Sask, which he did a great job on, among other things that he's done. But I'll let him introduce himself to all of you wonderful listeners.
Hey, everyone. My name is Scott Pettigrew. Happy to join you today. I'm from Regina, Saskatchewan. Technically not born there, but I've spent my whole life there. I was actually born in St. Albert. So big fan of this beautiful country. I got a chance to tour around it a little bit when I was doing music for a living. And now I actually work for various members of parliament in the House of Commons. So I've got a bit of a different background for sure. But I've been lucky to see some pretty cool things across this great country, and looking forward to seeing a whole lot more as I get older and wiser.
So a couple of things. First, I wanted to hear how many you've a quite a decent following musically, and you got to do this tour. Share with us a little bit about what it's like to tour Canada musically, but also what it's like to gain some success in the music industry.
Sure. Well, so to answer your first question, touring. So I can only really speak to Western Canadian touring because I'll be honest, I had a real hard time breaking into Ontario or Quebec or any of the Atlantic Canada markets. I think it's just a question of they've got a whole lot of talent there. And if you're somebody coming from Saskatchewan, you're not that big of a deal. It's kind of like, it's a bit of a hard sell, I'm not going to lie. And so, I have done some pro bono stuff out there, but I was never, ever actually able to finance like a whole tour based on the amount of shows I was getting. But on the West Coast end of things, I mean, touring Western Canada has got to be one of the most awesome adventures that you could ever do. And I was lucky enough to go all the way out to the tip of Victoria, like Vancouver Island, and in and around Victoria twice. And between Saskatchewan and there's just so much to see and do, and there's so many great places to play in Alberta, Saskatchewan, British Columbia. It's pretty unbelievable. Like the Duncan showroom in Duncan, British Columbia is something that kind of stands out as a really fun place I got to play. The owner, Longevity John Faulkner, he's this older kind of hippie guy, really interesting, super eclectic character, and his venue's just loaded with paraphernalia of like vintage film memorabilia, and it's just a super kitschy, cool, kind of unique, off the wall type place. And there's so many cool places like that that you get to play. So it was really lucky to do that. As far as the success, I mean, I guess everyone measures success differently. I feel like I've been really lucky to do some cool things. I got to open for Serena, Ryder, and Alex Cuba, namely some pretty talented Canadian artists that I've always kind of looked up to. I got to do the touring thing, got to record in a really beautiful studio in CBC Studio One with Juno Award-winning producer Jason Plum, who also worked with Coulter Wall in the Dead South, among others. It's been really cool. I feel really grateful for the ride I've had. And now it's kind of a question of, with the industry the way it is, which we can talk about later, it's more of a hobby for me now because the live revenue just isn't where it used to be. But looking forward to getting back out there and playing more shows when that's possible again.
So we ask everyone this. We're going to ask you, what do you love about Canada?
There's so much I love about Canada. I mean, one of the things that strikes me right away is just how diverse Canada is in the sense of, in every sense of the word, but especially regional diversity. Like the more I travel the country, the more I realize how every single province, and territory, which I haven't been to the territory, so I can't speak to it yet. But every single province I've been to, and I just meet so many great new people. I learn about the unique little vibe that town or that little area or that city has. And I mean, it's also unique, and I love that. Like, I love how Vancouver has got its own, Vancouver's a really, I don't think I could ever live in Vancouver. No offense to anyone there. It's definitely very high intensity. The rent's really expensive. But I mean, it's a beautiful world-class city. No one can deny that. Like, there's so many cool things.
Oh yeah. It's hard to argue that Vancouver I'd like someone to argue that there's a more beautiful city than Vancouver. It's difficult to do. Yeah.
It's astounding, right, with the mountains and the backdrop. And but then you've got that, and then you've got Calgary, which is obviously a completely different, experience and vibe, which is even different from Edmonton. And I mean, I could go down the list and just going west to east in my head right now. But the point is, I mean, there's just so many different things to do, drastically different experiences you can have. And I think it's just really cool to live in a country that has such a spectrum of experiences that you can have depending on where you are and what you're looking to do in life. Because I mean, depending on where you orient yourself, I have one friend from Saskatchewan. He's since moved out to the West Coast, and he's a geologist. He just studies rocks, right? And he spends all of his time in nature.
Yes.
All of his time in nature, right? And so if that's the kind of life you want to live in Canada, there's so many amazing places you could do that. If you want to be connected to nature, if you want to live in an urban sprawl environment with the dynamic economy and everything else, you could do that too. So there's just so much like freedom of choice when you live here as a Canadian citizen that I think is something I definitely don't take for granted.
That's a very interesting perspective, because people travel oftentimes to experience different peoples, different cultures, different geography, and you can kind of do that all within Canada, because the people in Halifax are different from the people in Quebec City, are different from the people in Toronto, are different from the people in Vancouver, and the landscapes are different and the land feels different, and yet it's all unified within the same country, and you can get all of that from one place, which is really, really fun. I hadn't thought of it that way before.
Yeah, I like that you brought it up that way, because nobody we're closing in on 50 episodes almost here, and nobody has said that. Before.
Yeah, you're unique. Congratulations.
You've actually come up with an utterly unique perspective, so I really like that. So you're a pretty unique guy. There's not a lot of political organizers / staffer musicians out there. What do you think it is about the art community that kind of tends to shy away from conservatism? And how are you feeling about bucking that trend? I think Zach and I would say that we feel pretty accepted by your musical community as conservatives. They're good people, but not all musical communities are that way. And what have you noticed about that? And just kind of your perspective on being a conservative in the arts, but also not just a conservative, but like a committed partisan.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question. I mean, truth be told, the experiences can definitely be what I would describe as a mixed bag. There's people out there that have been really supportive. There's people out there who have been incredibly antagonistic. They've made it a personal point to try to go after me. So it's a spectrum for sure. That said, I think it's always important to establish kind of common definitions. Like, a lot of people in that scene, to speak plainly, they don't really have a lot of experience dealing with conservatives or people that identify as conservatives. And I think a lot of the things they think you believe just aren't true, right? A 10, 20-minute conversation with a person is, usually you'll uncover, okay, no, I don't actually think that. And no, where did you read that? And whatever else. So I think there's a lot of sort of straw manning going on to a pretty extreme degree, to the point where people want to try to paint you out as being sort of fringe or something like that, when the beliefs I hold are extremely mainstream beliefs. So I'm not really in any way ashamed of those beliefs. And I mean, when it comes to the party itself and certain people in the party that people might not like or whatever, I mean, my perspective on it is politics is it's human beings, right? So there's never, ever, ever going to be a party that doesn't have people that you like and dislike. I mean, that's the nature of the game. But to me, it's like, you got to participate in that process in order to really have a say. And so, I don't know. I respect if people don't like what I'm doing and they're out doing their own thing and being active and fighting for what they believe in. And you know what, all the power to them. It's definitely just a little irritating when people are, they're negative that you're involved in a certain party or movement when they're not engaged at all. And that is a little frustrating because I think, at the end of the day, I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing it because I believe it's what's best for Canada. And it's what Canada needs. That you might not agree with that. Not everyone agrees with that. But, I personally think that we need to get rid of Justin Trudeau and this Liberal government. I strongly believe that. And I've been working hard to make that happen. I'll defend that position to anyone. It's a mixed bag. There's some support. There's some serious criticism for sure. There's been a couple instances where people have gone way past acceptable with me though. Like there's one time there was a potential client. It was actually a university. I won't tell you which one. And they basically called me 2 or 3 times and they were giving me like ideological screening. Like they were asking me about my thoughts on free speech and stuff like that. And they kept calling me back, and it was like increasingly probative questions about my like ideology or whatever. And at the end of it, I sort of just was like, okay, I don't even know if there's a gig at the end of this. So it was a very weird experience. I don't know if there was ever going to be a gig at the end of it. They kind of kept calling.
Was that for music? They were trying to hire you to play, and they were screening.
Yeah, they were.
They were screening like basically your ideologies and political beliefs.
Yes. Well, and this is wild, and this is why I won't tell you what university is. But the one thing she said was she actually she said that because I was in favor of free speech, she said, does that mean you're in favor of harassing women? That was the exact language she used. Boy.
And I think
I was blown away because it was totally not even on the table of the conversation. She was it was a complete red herring. She just brought it in. And I was like, this wasn't
showed up.
I think therein lies the problem, because I think too often people associate something like free speech with something terrible like that. I think that you can be I think you can accept free speech and also reject talking terribly to anyone, women, men, anyone. Like you can abuse free speech, but it doesn't mean that you don't believe in it. And you can choose to reject hateful speech while still believing in free speech.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's any conflict there. I mean, it's a question of, do you think the government should be able to insert themselves into that situation with ultimately, force and say, hey, you can't say that. And I'm not an absolutist when it comes to free speech. I don't think you should be able to yell fire in a crowded theater or make bomb threats or, go after like whatever. I understand that there needs to be legal limitations on speech to a degree, but I think there's a lot of people in the culture now that have lost sight of the real value of freedom of speech as a general principle in society. And that's why I try to be an advocate for it. And that does attract some negative attention sometimes, as you said, not because of what I actually think, but because of the connotations that some of these people have developed in their minds when they hear quote unquote free speech advocate or something like that, right? Because they think, oh, that person's just something. And they'll often just attribute other things that are unrelated. Like I said, that whole harassing women. I mean, we weren't talking about that. It was just something that was in her head.
Just got thrown in.
Something else that had happened or something else she had seen, right? And I think similarly, you could also see that sort of thing happening with, you can also see that sort of thing happening with, free speech, you're anti-mask, or free speech, you're this, or just kind of like piggybacking random other labels that they've kind of seen in the media or whatever. I do experience that a fair amount, where people just kind of try to attribute ideas to you that you've never had or defended. Is sort of like, where did that even come from? But I think it's sort of just maybe it's the media that's giving them these ideas and creating links where there often are none. But I don't know.
Well, I think in any good, political war, there's going to be propaganda. I think that's just the nature of things. And, you always want to paint your opponents as bad as possible and your team as good as possible for the troops and all that. But at the end of the day, I think it's gone too far in Canada, but not as bad as in America. But we've started to make it as if we're not even fellow citizens anymore. Right? We're now, if you vote liberal, like there are conservatives who will hate you just for doing that, right? And the vice versa.
Which, on either side, I think we should take a moment to say that we strongly disagree.
Oh,
with.
exactly.
If I can speak for at least David and I.
I'm sure you can speak for Scott too. We should never hate people for their. I mean, I think it was the rabbi that we had on who talked about politics shouldn't be that important.
Yeah.
Right?
Stop making a god out of it.
Like it's not what should be the most important things to us. And this is what actually I want to get to, Scott, is you love beauty, obviously, because you love music. And like you can't really love music without loving beauty. And what is the beauty that you see in politics? Because usually we're attracted to the same kind of beauty wherever we find it. What about politics is like music for you?
That's a good question. I don't necessarily have them in the same part of my brain, so to speak, if that makes any sense. To me, music is sort of that's something that I love. It's like it's a passion. It comes from deep in my belly. It's something that I just habitually do. I've always done. I've been playing since I was grade 2, grade 3, whatever, here and there, teaching myself. And so that's kind of an innate thing. With politics, it's more coming from the, I don't know if you believe in the right, left side of the brain or whatever.
Well, I mean, it's scientifically, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm no expert.
Right.
You can't tell. But from the other side of my brain, I think is where the politics, kind of comes into play, where it's sort of my looking at the world around me and, kind of seeing what's going on and saying, hey, something's wrong here. Like I need to get involved and kind of help out, because at least where I am in Regina and, kind of South Central Saskatchewan, like I've seen a pretty noticeable, there's a big drop off in optimism in general. People are feeling way less hopeful about the future and their family's future and whether their kids are going to be better off than they were. I'm seeing lots of people losing their jobs, like everyone is across the country. But, this has been going on for some time now in the resource sector and to a limited extent agriculture and some other industries. But I've just kind of felt like, there's, and I'm not going to be, I don't want to fit into I don't want to do the whole Trudeau bashing thing or whatever, but since Trudeau really won, it's kind of been just a slow creep down is kind of what I felt. I've kind of felt that general slow contraction of the economy. It's hard to explain, but with my music business, for instance, it's kind of like 2016, 2017 were my best years. And then 2018, 2019, it's just sort of, you're getting by, right? And that's not everyone's experience for sure, but I've just kind of felt that in general. And there's a lot of people out there that I think are really lacking that optimism and that hope right now. And so kind of made me want to get involved, basic service and kind of just a commitment to like what I see as my community and what I think will help, make some people's lives a little better. But I wouldn't say that I'm as passionate about it as I am music in the same way necessarily.
I like that. I want us to dig further into that. So like, let's talk about the feeling you get from serving in a political sense, and then the feeling you get from playing music, and kind of dig into what's going on there in your mind.
Well, that's a good question. Well, I mean, for me, the feeling I get when I'm working, in politics, when I'm trying to serve, I mean, it's sort of the same kind of feeling that I get when I used to work in like sales, customer service type jobs, because it's sort of like somebody has a need and you're working hard to try and meet that need in good faith. And if you are able to meet that need, like if you're doing constituency work, I don't know if anybody listening's worked for a politician. Constituency work is like dealing with people's problems with employment insurance and other government programs. And, if you could solve a problem for somebody, that's to me really rewarding feeling. But and the same is true on a bigger scale. If you win an election against an opponent
yes,
that
yes,
you
then you
don't
feel like your
like,
team has, achieved
yeah,
something. Yeah,
you've achieved something. It's like that feeling of work satisfaction, right? But with music, on the other hand, it's sort of like just this transcendent experience. When it's good, and it's not like every time I think there's some people, and I don't know whether they're lying or whether they really feel like this, but at least for me, it's not like every time I pick up a guitar or every time I go on stage, I just get this unbelievable, magical feeling. It's not like that. I mean, there's a lot of gigs that I've done that were, less than glamorous, especially in some of the early days, honking it away at dive bars for $100 a night type thing, right? I've 100% been there. And I wouldn't necessarily say that as I'm sitting in the corner, no one's listening to me, I'm not making as much cash
Right.
as I want,
Right.
that I'm sitting there, it's just filled with butterflies. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that. But what I will say is that there are moments that you get on stage, and especially in studio. I've always been a studio guy. That's kind of what the environment that I thrive in, that I enjoy. I like having complete control over my environment. But especially on stage, and there's those special moments where if the band's just locked perfectly and you just absolutely kill a solo and the crowd just loves it, and it was just the right amount of time. It wasn't too long, it wasn't too short, or whatever. Those moments are pretty special, and it's really hard to explain. It's like better than the best roller coaster I've been on. It's a real adrenaline rush when it's good. Like I said, I'm not going to lie to you and say that every time I get a guitar in my hands, I get that feeling. But there are lots of times when, and it doesn't have to be in front of a whole bunch of people. Sometimes it could just be 4 people in a room, but it's just sort of that feeling of when things really click in and lock into place like they're supposed to. I love that feeling. So yeah, it's definitely a whole other level above sort of politics and that world, for me, anyway.
Yeah, Zach and I were talking about this a little bit before the show, about how my relationship with music has always been that of a consumer of music, and less. I mean, I played piano growing up. I played sax growing up. Like I played, I did the whole school music thing, but I never was a musician. Whereas both you and Zach have been. Zach's been in front of tens of thousands of people playing with Walk Off the Earth, and I guess what I wanted to know from you guys is, when I get really into a song, when I get lost in it, or I've been at live shows where the whole crowd gets lost in the music. You can feel that moment where, we've transcended. There's a spiritual moment going on right now. What is that like in comparison, I would say, to say giving a political speech? What do you think is the difference?
Well, Zach, want to maybe?
I wouldn't be able to comment because I've never given a political speech.
Well, riff on it.
Yeah. I can speak to the magic of the moment in a live sense. I think what makes that live moment so special, and I think we touched this on another podcast. I think it was a Lexicon of Labor episode, actually. What I like to say about it is that it's so unlikely. And what I mean by that is you have a song that has been written. Let's just take a heartbreak song, for example, okay? So we are, through art, expressing human emotion. And this person who wrote that song experienced that emotion in the scenario that they experienced it, but all of the people in the room, if they've ever gone through a similar experience, are drawing from their own experiences. So that, in the first place, is unlikely. Even the idea of music itself is unlikely. Like the idea of stringing metal to wood and then hitting it and like touching stuff with your hands and making music, like that's a whack idea. Then you can talk about all of the other factors that play into it, like electricity. That had to be discovered to make concerts happen.
True.
Someone had to figure out how to build a building. And you know what? A lot of people died learning to build buildings because they got crushed by their shitty buildings. And so like there is a bigger story to be drawn out when you hit that moment and the band is gelling together and the audience is gelling with that moment and the emotion is all being experienced at one time in a building that isn't collapsing through a PA that sounds awesome with a light show that's captivating.
Wow.
And it's like, that is
There you
so
go, Zach.
unlikely. It is.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
And what it is it is an
Magic.
example and a testament to human potential, that we were able to put that many factors together to create that moment. And when that moment hits, there's an experience. It's an experience like no other.
Yeah,
I agree completely. Another thing I just want to briefly on that point talk about the unlikely nature of the music industry now. You guys can see this, no one else can. I'm holding up a Universal Audio Apollo. Not an expensive, not a super expensive device. I mean, they're not cheap, but they're $1,000 or whatever. So, I mean, you can save up to get one, and it's definitely attainable. But that can do, as you know, what a studio that would have cost God knows how much would have done, a few decades ago. Just with two little inputs, you can do all that in your computer. And so what I think is really exciting about this age that we live in general is that the tools that the scientific and the technological researchers and companies are putting together for creative people to be able to actually employ are increasingly changing the game of creation and making it a way more seamless experience. And I think that's a really exciting thing. It's becoming so much more accessible, which I think is great. And I think most importantly, to me, as somebody who's got the opportunity to work in some analog studios and on analog boards and like full analog Neve rigs with Peltronics, LA2As all over the place and all the outboard gear you could ask for type deals, I've really come to appreciate how remarkably seamless the workflow inside of a modern computer is, and how easy it is for you to get something that sounds pretty decent pretty quick. So yeah, I just think it's really cool how there's all these people that are working on this technology that they're coming from a totally different headspace of design and engineering and, technology. And they're really making tools for people who are fully in a creative headspace. And they don't really understand how the things work internally, but they just employ them to make things and make art that we all enjoy. So it's just a bit of a tangent there, but that's one of the coolest things about the modern music industry is just how accessible it's becoming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, you can look at that as unlikely. So you talk analog gear, right? Even just the fact that we were able to harness electricity and build analog gear that could change the sound of it, that in and of itself is unlikely. But now the next phase on top of that is now we have people whose jobs are to take the flavor of that electrical experience and turn it into zeros and ones that I can have at the tip of my fingertips for,
it's mind-blowing.
We're talking like 1/100th of the cost. And that is it's mind-boggling.
It's a revolution, right? It's changing everything. And some of those changes are good and some of them are bad. I'd say we start with the bad. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of music being recorded right now that is not necessarily the best in terms of people not putting the most time and attention into it. Just kind of like, there's a lot of stuff that I would be like, it's hard to describe exactly what it is, but they take a radio song or some kind of sound that they heard and they like, and they tweak it a little bit, like kind of 20%, and then they throw a whole bunch of auto-tune on it and then just kind of like ship it. And there's so much of that music going on right now. And I don't think it's like, it doesn't offend me. It's not like I lie awake at night, bothered by it, but it's definitely fluff. And a lot of the music that I hear now is fluff. And I think part of the reason for that is because it's so inexpensive to record and so quick to record. It's just like, it doesn't need to be amazing. It's more of a focus on like content. These artists, they want to push out more content and they want to be visible and active. So I think there's almost more of a premium on expediency now than quality. And I think that's generally true universally in our society right now, but specifically in music, especially with the factor of the cost, the dramatic changes in cost in terms of how much it actually costs somebody to record an album or a single. There's no question that flood of the market has brought its fair share of challenges as well. And another thing that I'd say is maybe not so good about the accessibility is I think there's definitely a trend right now towards, I think a lot of people are trying to do it. And I'm speaking from direct experience as somebody who probably should have hired a producer on a couple of projects that I've been working on for a while and have been just kind of spinning in circles. Like after working with a couple of producers, I've realized the value of working with producers, and especially when that's a talented producer like Jason Plum that I got the privilege of working with, and they bring a lot to the table, and not just from a technical perspective. I think a lot of people get lost in that, and that's one thing that I'm trying to skirt around. If you think of the best records that we all love, usually there's pretty iconic producers behind that record. It's not that they're 100% responsible for it. I'm not trying to say that. It's like, obviously the artists are still, they're the artists. So
they're number one.
Exactly. So, but I think that producer role, I think some people, or I think a lot of people, frankly, especially in the indie side of things, or at least people trying to get started. And if anyone is trying to get started listening to me, take my advice. Go hire a producer. Go find somebody with some experience.
Hire Zach.
And
hire me.
Hire Zach. Yeah. Hire Zach. Well, and honestly, I mean, it's not like it's just even the process. Regardless of who it is, like the process of bouncing ideas off of somebody else and forcing yourself to deconstruct your songs and think critically about how they're organized and how the instrumentation is going to work and things like that. I think it just improves recording so much. And so that's another thing that I think people should not lose sight of that, and because you get way too in your own head as an artist, and that's one thing I'm learning. At least that's for me. I think I need to work at least with one producer.
As a producer,
it's not going to get stuff done.
Yeah, as a producer, I can assure you, it is not just you.
Yeah.
But if I may, I want to speak to this for a moment, because this is like my whole world.
Yeah.
The music industry has a habit of discovering something, abusing it, and then putting it in check. Okay, so
the pendulum.
I'll give you some examples. Reverb in the 80s was whack, dude. It was out of hand.
I know those big bad Lexicon Hall reverbs on everything.
And I use Lexicons on a daily basis, but not that heavily.
Yeah.
And then the late 90s and early 2000s hit, and people started tuning vocals, and then T-Pain happened, and that was fun, but there was an excessive tuning of vocal. And now if you listen to a lot of, there still is, but it's corrected itself, right? In my opinion.
Yeah. It's getting better.
I think
definitely.
right now what we are abusing is the ability to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And I think because of and I think it's been brought on by the technological revolution, the fact that you can go out and get an Apollo Twin for $1,200, plug in a $300 microphone, and sound great right away. Mm-hmm. And I think it's tricked people into believing that they can do all of it themselves. And I tell this to musicians all the time. The way musicians work to perfect songwriting or to perfect their instrument, I've worked for a decade and a half to perfect making that song sound good, and you can't replace that experience. And so I think so take an example, here we have Billie Eilish, who made a record with her brother in a bedroom, and it won Grammys, right? That's incredible. And I'm not taking anything away from that, but I hope at least we have reached the end of the do-it-yourself trend. And I hope that people come back to realize and want to experience again the idea of a group of musicians getting together in a room to work out songs, as opposed to writing songs in your bedroom, plugging in your Apollo and hitting record. And I think another piece to that puzzle is you get in the room, you write the song with your team, with your band, and then you take it to a producer and you work with the producer to take it to that next level. Because even when I was playing in bands, when I took the songs that I was writing to producers, it was like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize how easy it would be to switch a couple small things and make this so much more impactful, because musicians do get in their heads, and it takes a third party who is not in that place of being buried in the piece of art already to objectively say, man, your intro's a minute and a half long, and like that's not going to play on the radio.
Right.
For sure. No, there's no question about that. Well, and to build on that, because you're absolutely correct. I echo 100% on what you're saying right now. To build on that, like, I think what was really cool, and I just want to speak a little bit to my experience making my full-length album for a minute. I mean, in the old days, there was kind of the format was kind of, you'd have a house band for the record, right? You'd have your kind of core rhythm section and those kind of people. And then you'd have your auxiliary crew, you'd have your string crew, you'd have your horns crew, you'd have whatever else kind of instrumentation group you needed, and then kind of switch them in and out throughout the recording process. And what was really cool for me is that I actually got to make my record that way. And it was, like I said, on that big, like it was a 38 channel Neve Genesis desk that the guy had to mix on. So real big, beautiful analog console, which like, I don't think I'll probably ever use one of those again, if I'm being honest. The cost is way prohibitive, and I mean, it is nice, but I don't know if it's as nice as it needs to be for the cost. But no, it was really cool so, I came in with these songs, and then I thought they were great, and I think they were good. I listened to the demos, the original stuff. I mean, it's not like they were bad, but then Jason and I worked together on them, change up some of the structures, here, do this, tweak that. And then you have the next round, 2 acoustic demos. You could listen to that and be like, oh, wow, look, all these things changed. And then you start introducing the rhythm section. And we kind of did it in the way where there weren't really a lot of charts going around for the rhythm section. It was kind of, we kind of worked off the demos. And by the time we were in the studio, they all kind of knew what they wanted to do and all that. And I was pretty hands off, and Jason was pretty hands off, because these guys that played on my record were just total pros, like great rhythm section. And so they kind of just did their thing, which I love, that kind of spirit of record making when, you kind of, you have a band that works good together, or a rhythm section that sounds tight, and you can kind of be hands off. You're not, in the box later trying to fix everything, or you're not trying to create sounds that weren't there before. It's more of capturing what happened on the floor than trying to create a moment that never happened at all, right? And then the really cool part was that final layer of bringing in the horns and the strings, and they had 2 different people arranged the horns and string part. So I didn't actually have any hand in arranging the horns or the strings, which is the only part of the album that I didn't really have any writing control over, like musically anyways. But it was so cool because these other arrangers were coming to the table. The one guy worked at the University of Alberta, and he did the strings, and just like blew me away. And he brought a whole new energy to my song, and he was using melodic lines that I didn't really hear in the song before. But now I was kind of like, oh, wow, I can kind of hear where you're getting that melody from in the song I wrote, right? So it's really weird. Wow. It's really a weird kind of experience. And the same thing's doubly true for those horn parts, not to plug my album a little bit. If you go listen to the song, I Don't Want to Be Your Friend, you can easily find it on Spotify.
Pause for a second.
Sure.
Plug the album.
Yeah, plug the album.
Just plug the album. You don't have to be. Don't have to be modest. Plug the album.
Yeah, we're not just the friendly, nice Canadians here. We're pumping up our boys.
Yeah, plug it.
Nice. Okay, I love it. All right. Okay. So yeah, if you go listen to my album, Rising Tide, there's a song on it called I Don't Want to Be Your Friend. It's probably the best song to listen to the horns. And if you want to listen to the strings, go listen to All Good Things Must Die. They're on a few songs, but those 2 songs, they're pretty heavily featured. But the horns, such a cool experience. So here's what's really cool about this. So my producer, Jason, he's talking up these great horn players that he's worked with and whatever. And, he's showing me some of their stuff. They sound killer. Like, they just sound awesome. It's like they sound like they're from the 70s. There's just great tone, full, like exactly what you'd hope for like a real live horn trio or quartet kind of sound. It was just killer. And I was just super impressed. Like, yeah, go get him, bring him in. Like, this is great. Because I had a lot of trust in Jason. He's really experienced. And then they show up, and sure enough, the guy who's leading them is my old substitute teacher from high school that was with us for like 2-3 years.
Amazing.
And so he was my old teacher who ended up playing on my stuff.
That's awesome. There's the Canadian story for you.
Yeah. And he was, and I mean, great guy. Colin Neufeld is his name. Great guy, great player. But there was 3 or 4 of them, and it was just super killer because he was sitting on, and we had this huge, what's the brand name? It's driving me crazy. It was like $100,000 piano. What are a couple high-end
Steinway
piano brands? No, it wasn't a Steinway. It was the other one. It was the Austrian one. I think it started with a B.
I'm not gonna get it, I don't think.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. It was but like it's this huge, comically huge, big black grand piano.
They're massive. You don't realize how massive they are until you stand beside one.
No.
Like, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's crazy because you just go over and use this thing as a table, and then you come back with these lines, and some of the horn, like some of the chords he was writing, like for the horns to play, were really weird, but they just worked when they were in the mix with the other music. So I was listening to them by themselves. I was like, well, okay, yeah, it's kind of cool. And then once it was in the mix, I was like, wow, this is incredible. So It definitely goes to show it's really good to get people who specialize in their instrument, or if they're good at, writing horn parts, like let them write the horn parts. Because I would have never come up with those parts. There's no way I would have come up with those same parts if I tried to write them myself. I would have come up with something completely different, probably nowhere near as cool. So just to further reinforce, the idea, like work with other people, producers, arrangers, artists, like it just brings so much more to the table.
Your music will be better. And I think that's an important thing to draw out for any young musicians listening. Get good at one thing, and then let other people be good at other things.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, we have 10 minutes left. This is important. What is the future of music? Like, where are we headed? What is going to be the sound of our roaring 20s?
That's a good question. I think we're probably going to be going towards some sort of I think there's been a lot of, let me put it this way. The way I see it, music kind of works in cycles. Like you have kind of the 80s, they go into the high decadent, like you were describing earlier, this big lexicon reverbs and splashy, huge snare drums and, just like stadium rockers. And then you go to 90s, which is like Nirvana and Oasis and like all these kind of sad, grungy, kind of, grunge, right?
That is what they called it.
Yeah. Grungy. Well, I mean, they are grungy because they are grunge.
Yes.
But I personally think we're headed towards a more of like a stripped down era where I think there's been a lot of polish in music in general over the last 5-10 years. Especially like I'll watch a YouTube video of some kid playing a cover on a guitar, and like he's auto-tuned like crazy, and it's like this isn't even necessary in my opinion. So I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of auto-tune. I like a light touch when it comes to auto-tune. It's not like I am against using it at all. It's just I think I hear too much of it still for my own taste on lots of, especially for the pop stuff. That's the sound. That's like I get that. It's a style thing. But for when I listen to like country music or any kind of roots or singer-songwriter stuff or anything that's supposed to be like intimate and I hear all this auto-tune, it's a real turn off for me. So
it's a bummer.
I'm hoping that we get to a little bit more intimacy in music and a little bit more like performance, as opposed to, again, making events that never happened happen, like trying to capture things that actually happened in the studio floor.
I really I love that you're saying that, because that's like philosophically, I think, such an important idea, right? Is we shouldn't try to so much of the modern world is creating illusions, right? It's an illusion of safety, an illusion of security, an illusion, and music, you're saying, has become illusionary, right? It's not; these aren't even real. This isn't even a real song anymore. It's something else, right?
Well, and sorry to interrupt, but when you get a guitar player in a studio who can't play a solo to save their lives, but then you take, they do the solo 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, and
30,
they do
40,
it in
50
or whatever. Sometimes the examples are outrageous, and they get them to put it together, and then they look like a real hero in the music video with the glasses, and they're playing, and it looks like they're playing, it sounds like they're playing, but they can't play that. They can't play that. And so to me, there's a fine line between, obviously we all fix little mistakes here and there in post, like that's part of the process. I'm not going to say that that's wrong or bad, but I think there's a very firm line in the sand where it's like, okay, this is makeup, or whatever, this is just slight modification of your appearance, beautification maybe, and then there's like transformative overhaul plastic surgery, where you've got a whole new face, it's like not the same person at all.
Yeah.
I would like to speak to that also, if I may, because, and this comes back to the technology factor, because there is so much ability to fix. I think the pressure has been taken off the musician and put onto the engineer and the producer. And while you can accomplish that perfection sound through all of the editing tools and all of the tuning and all of the timing and all of that stuff, you lose magic and you sacrifice something that is hard to put your finger on. But I promise you, if you're a musician, if you get better at your craft, your music will come out better. Put the pressure back on yourself and you will be happy you did it.
Absolutely. When I listen to the recordings, and I'm just speaking of personal experience, but when I listen to my old album, which I don't do often, by the way, but if I listen to it, every once in a while, I'll get reminiscing, or I'll see an old picture and I want to listen to it again. And just because it, for me, and what I'm going to say is, like, when I hear the guitar part on the album, I can remember the exact moment that I tracked that guitar part and I was like, chills down my spine. I nailed this take, right? And that's that huge sense of reward that you get, at least for me, when I can finish a take from start to finish. Like, Don't Want to Be Your Friend, I did that take from start to finish basically in one sitting. I think there's like one cut in it where it goes from one take to another take, but it was basically like one take that I just had practiced kind of what I wanted to do, and I really just let go, and I just kind of went all into the music, and I was just feeling it. I was in such a good headspace, and everything was. And so when I hear that song, I think back to that moment in time, and I can literally retrace my steps on the fretboard of when I played what I played and how I'd slid up to that note, and I can hear that slide happen instead of hammering on or whatever, like those little tiny nuances in playing, singing. You lose all that stuff, right? If you just chop it all together. And if you're listening to something that's been shot together out of 50 parts, you don't have any memories of you nailing that take, because you never did nail that take. The engineer nailed that take for you, right?
There you go.
And so
Yes.
to me, it's literally like if you're playing, this is a crude analogy, but if you're playing Grand Theft Auto and you're able to get to 5 stars and go out of the top of some building and not die, or do whatever it is you're trying to do, and you don't have any cheats on, and you're like almost going to die the whole time, and you're like, trying to get your health or whatever, that's like satisfying. You're like, I did it. But if you put yourself on invincible mode and do that, it's like, yay, I made it, right? There's no real sense of satisfaction. And so to me, I think the harder a task is, and like the more you have to push yourself to rise to meet that occasion, the more satisfaction. So to me, if you're a musician and you're recording, there's nothing wrong with, I'm not saying that you can't, edit your stuff. It's just a question of like, all right, how many different colors in your DAW are you seeing on each line of the track, or how many different clips are being, and if it's starting to get to a point, you'd be like, you know what, maybe I should just practice this part some more and get it to the point where I can play it well.
Right,
and I'm not trying to toss shade, but it's just a reality, right? It's like, practice your instrument, I think people get too lost in the tech in the music industry now, for sure. And not that it's not an amazing, I'm not obviously not anti-technology. I'm not a Luddite. I just think that, it's like the point of the technology is to capture the performance. The point isn't to invent some performance that never happened.
Scott, you're laying fire right now. I love it. I want to hear where you think the music industry is going.
I feel like I touched on it with what I said before. We are in an age now of the do it yourself with your twin, meaning Apollo twin for people who are confused, not like your actual physical twin. Just a little interface, like in your bedroom, make the music by yourself. I kind of feel like even if you listen to something like The Weeknd, a lot of those overtones are very 80s, and I kind of feel like
I think we're going back there. Yeah.
With the amount of production and polish and effects and feel that we are experiencing, like that to me is an 80s era. And so my nostalgic heart hopes in the next 5 years we get a new Nirvana.
Yes. Oh, it's coming for sure. I agree.
Because I don't feel like there's been, and maybe, like, where are the great musicians right now?
Oh, they're out there. Like, you can't, just because production is polished doesn't mean the
No, that's not what I mean. It's like,
shoddy.
I don't even mean, I know that there's great musicians out there. What I mean is, like, I feel like we don't have a genre right now. We don't have a generational genre.
I know what you're getting at, David, in the sense, like, we don't have a Michael Jackson. Like, we don't have, like, global personalities that dominate,
like, or the Beatles,
culture. or the Rolling Stones,
or Nirvana to some degree. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, I agree. To me, I just want to quickly add my 2 cents to that. To me, I think a big part of that is how much distribution has changed, in the sense where in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, to a lesser extent the 90s, and then no longer in the 2000s. But, like, if you're a record company and you have control over global distribution and you're getting albums into countries that not a whole lot of albums go to, like, you're only sending your 6, 7, 8 top best performing kind of albums, the most popular stuff, as a business decision, obviously. And so when you're buying physical copies, and those physical copies are harder to track down, etc., to me, I think that's probably a big reason why some people and some bands got so famous as they did with that global reach, is because there's a bottleneck on the distribution. There were gatekeepers, right? So only so many people could actually get through to the masses in any given market. And so I think my answer to that would be, I don't know if we're ever going to have that type of phenomenon again. I think it's going to be way more decentralized,
right?
Just because of the distribution alone.
Yeah,
how people access
that's a very good point, and one that I've heard people bring up before. I just wonder, are we never going to get a genre again? Like, are we never going to get jazz? Right? Like, where's the? I want artists to start building out like let's build something new.
I agree. I think a big part of the problem there is that the industry is demanding genre classification, because they really like organizing artists by genre, and like, because it's easier for people to consume that way in a lot of ways. If you're like, I'm a country listener, and you show up and you say I'm country, well, they kind of know what to expect, so they like that.
It's an algorithm thing. Spotify knows what to serve you.
Yes.
Yeah. But even further than that, it's also a festival thing, and it's also a radio thing.
Yep.
And I kept running in, and my biggest problem is that people were throwing me in blues. They're like, "You're blues. You're a blues musician," and I'm cool. I love the blues. Like, I wouldn't take that as an insult, But also, my music has quite a bit of country in it too, and my music, you might be able to call it singer-songwriter or folk. So, like, there's a bunch of different genre labels that kind of could apply in my situation, at least. So I think part of the problem with the industry is that because everyone in the industry wants to put you into these lanes, it's like you fall into those lanes.
You can't create a
whether
new
you
lane.
like it or not.
I like that.
Yeah, it's really hard to create a new lane. And it's not impossible. It's a real challenge. So
yeah. Unfortunately, we have another guest in 8 minutes that we have to get ready for. But Scott, always a pleasure talking to you. I've wanted to talk to you like this about music ever since we met, but we hadn't had the chance really. So I'm just very happy. Thanks for your offer to help. He's offered to send some stems for our project.
Oh, amazing.
So I'm sure Zach will be in touch on that as well.
Yeah, for sure. No, that would be fun. And no, thanks for having me. It's been great. It's been great chatting with you guys. And no, you have a great show going. So I'm really happy to be a part of it. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's The CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their country is.